Hey everybody, it's noon Pacific on Monday, so you know what time it is. It's content chat time. And today we have my friend, colleague, and all-around content marketing rock star, Amy Higgins, is joining us today to help everybody here do a great job with their end of the year results presentations, whether you're doing them for internal audiences or external audiences. Amy knows the secrets to putting together those end of the year reports that highlight your results in a way that can get you promoted, get you more people on your team, or at least make the case for why you need more budget in the new year. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Erica. I'm so excited to be here. It's definitely that time of year where everybody's polishing and presenting their end of year metrics. So this is very timely for us to talk about today.
And I'd say even if you haven't received an official request from anybody, you know, your manager or the head of marketing to put this stuff together, you want to put it together anyway, because how are you going to make the case for the raise or promotion you want for the next year if you haven't put together your metrics and shown how you've grown and how the work that you've done has contributed to the bottom line? So I think that's always something to note, because I've heard people say before, oh, well, no one's asked me for that. I'll just wait until they ask me because it'll be such, so much work. But I think, Amy, I think you have a similar perspective, which is don't wait to be asked, tell people the value you're bringing early and often, because that's how you ensure content continues to be a department.
Also, it's a lot easier when your manager comes and says, hey, could you do this? And you're like, oh, I already have it. Here you go. And then the conversation becomes, how do we tweak it? How do we change it? What's missing? Versus you stressing about it for a week or weeks or months trying to get it done, and then it not being perfect when you deliver it last minute.
100%.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, let's just dive right into the questions that we shared on Twitter. Of course, if you have any comments, any follow-up questions, or anything you want to add for any of these questions that I'm asking Amy, you can feel free to go ahead and tweet them at Erika Heald and at Amy W. Higgins on Twitter, and Alec will make sure that we see them. Or if you're listening on LinkedIn, you can go ahead and just comment on the page for this live stream event, and those comments will auto-magically come onto our screens, and we can highlight you here in the webinar, in the conversation on screen, and get your burning questions answered for you. All right. So now, what are some of the things that content marketers frequently forget when they're preparing those end of the year reports?
I think a lot of it is, I broke it down to 4 things. So people, productivity, competition, and innovation. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we focus on the hard metrics and forget about the soft metrics.
Yeah.
So who are you working with on your team who has really excelled? Who has tried something new? Who have you worked with outside of your team that you helped their team better? You tried something new. You worked in the background and changed things. For example, one year I worked with a company that my product marketing manager, he was in charge of the website. And so I worked with him, our web analytics team, the SEO team, and we ended up getting like 1,200% year over year search increase. Now, if I just said 1,200%, that's a great number, but showcasing that Julian and Brian and I worked together, we were sitting on completely different teams, completely different managers, and we were able to accomplish that goal together. So giving kudos and calling that out.
I think that's really important. And I'd also add that when you do those kinds of cross-organizational collaborations, then when you get that positive feedback, like you get those emails, it's really a great idea to create kind of a kudos folder or something like that, where you save all of those, positive things that people say about that collaboration too, because then you can pepper that into the report. Because, when you get somebody who very rarely gives out praise, saying what an amazing contribution something is that you did, that can be another really meaningful qualitative thing to include when you're talking about the people element.
Yeah, I would save it either on my one-on-one doc with my boss and put it underneath as a kudos section, or just make a kudos folder in your email. And then anything that has praise, you put that in there. The other thing to look at is process and productivity. So how have you changed things? What have you reduced time to market? So for example, I worked at one company where the agency we're working with really overcharged us. We were paying for customer case stories like 5 times average.
Oh, no.
And yeah, I know. I was like, we're paying how much? And when I got in there and started reworking things, I was able to reduce our content spend by 82%. And
Amazing.
so changing agencies, changing people, realigning process, how we did things, when we did things, showcasing that as a value is definitely helpful. And a lot of people forget about that. They're like, oh yeah, this agency sucked. We got rid of them. We hired someone else. But they forget, like, that's a lot of money that you guys just saved.
Exactly. And things like documenting and improving upon a process so that way it can be replicated more easily by folks. Or, if you are able to delegate work to someone else, those are also time and money savings that I think are really good to call out from a productivity and process standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes there's key stakeholders who are blockers.
Mhm.
And I've had the hard conversations with them. Why I know you want to review this. I know it's important to you, but I feel like we're monopolizing your time trying to get these reviews. Is there a better time or effort of where you'd like to be in here? And usually once you have that conversation, then that process changes. And that can reduce time to market as well.
Or I had that happen where the person said, oh, I totally agree. So just put time on my calendar and you can sit with me while I review things, which is quite maddening
Yeah.
when you have plenty of other things to do. But if that is what it takes for somebody who won't, give up the reins and won't, cede their spot on the approval committee, if you've got to do it, just go ahead and do that and bring a book you've been meaning to read. Or something with you. So that way you can be both present and productive doing something else.
Yeah. Some other things that help with productivity and process is how you're updating the teams throughout. So one of the things I changed at one company is I reported monthly metrics, and we had the month over month metrics, but then we also had key wins and key losses and lesson learned. And so it's a perfect opportunity to showcase how people can subscribe to get to that internally or where they need to go. So where they find the content request template, where they find the ongoing metrics, where they find how to do social shares. So end of year is a perfect time to reiterate those shares with your team.
Love that.
Yeah. The other thing that I think people forget about is competition. I don't like to compare myself to others, but products like to compare themselves to other
They
products.
sure do.
So looking at, say, if you have one company and you guys are both going after customer service industry, and one company specifically on customer service with AI and process, and one company is on customer service and heart and cares. It's really good to showcase the difference of your brands and how your content is on message. And then you can also compare, keywords. You can compare PR messaging. So that helps to pull out those metrics from your competition.
Do you have any favorite tools that you use to kind of do those comparisons or to get at that data?
I love SEMrush. So
Mm-hmm.
SEMrush, you can actually at the beginning of the year, so time to set it up now, you can set up a keyword list with your top 3 to 5 competitors. I wouldn't go past 5 because it's really hard to manage.
Yeah.
But looking at those, and then if you do some qualitative work and look at how people are messaging, and then you can cross compare that way. You can also use BuzzSumo to see how many shares their site is having versus your site.
I think those are all good. I would also add that I frequently will do a competitive social audit. So that way you can see like what content is really resonating with your shared audience with the different competitors, which can frequently give you ideas about where you might be able to change things up a little bit. And it can also just show you, if your numbers are good or not. Like, let's say you had 10% growth in followers on LinkedIn, and that feels great. But then you look and you see your competitors had 50% growth and that you both started from a similar spot. Then that says, hey, maybe we need to take a look at what they're doing and how is it that they are, getting so much more reach. At least I found that to be really helpful in the past.
Yeah, that's a great point. I worked with one larger B2B company that had multiple product lines, and they had multiple social accounts for each product line. And a lot of the audiences were the same. So they were actually diffusing their work by doing that. And so when we combined it and we combined the audience, we saw a lot more engagement and a lot more growth. But I could only showcase why we do that, why we need to, by looking at their competitors.
Yeah.
And then giving the pros and cons of the different ways.
Totally.
And lastly, I think a lot of people forget about innovation, things that you tried differently, especially right now in the age of AI. So I know a lot of companies are testing different things out with AI, seeing how it works, seeing how it doesn't work. This is a really good opportunity to bring those points up. That way, at the beginning of the new year, if you have your C-suite come to you and say, you know what, I'm going to let go the majority of your team because we can just use AI to write everything. It's really good to say, we've been trying AI. Here's what's working. Here's what's not working. Here's why I need to keep human writers on my team. And here's how we can use this innovative tool to help us, not replace us.
Exactly. And frankly, a lot of the work I've been doing in this, for fourth quarter, and a lot of what I've been talking about at conferences and will for next year too, is a lot of companies don't even have the documentation in place that's necessary for them to really take advantage of AI. It's certainly not anywhere near the case that they could produce anything content related that would be differentiated or on brand for their company, because they don't even have the foundational stuff in place for AI to be able to help them ensure they're on brand, let alone create content from scratch. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
So now, when you're thinking about some of your internal stakeholders, what are some of the content marketing metrics that you would want to be sharing in this report to showcase some of your key wins?
So I really think internally, you're going back to the people. So the key wins of how your team is helping other teams. Content marketing sometimes falls into that studio mix where we're requested to do content and not
services model.
and not an integrated team member. And so I think showing those metrics of how you guys work together, what you were able to improve, how it was better and why. Some of the good things are events. Like I at Lyra, the event content marketer, was on my team. And so showcasing how she was able to produce live events, online events, and then how we replicated that into content that helped the growth team. So that helped with lead generation. And so showcasing two teams with the help of one person, that's really important. The other thing to think about is when there's specific requests from your C-suite, how to evangelize thought leadership with your C-suite, how you're trying to get them known for a certain thing, how the work that you're doing or working with other team members to do that, what's working and what's not working for that.
And it's interesting because so much time is put into creating content for thought leadership, getting it distributed, doing things like being parts of executive boards, all of that. And almost never does anybody create that kind of end of the year report around how successful all those thought leadership efforts were. it's sort of like people feel like, oh, well, we did the thing. Our KPI is to do the 12 pieces of contributed content. Well, it's done. And you're like, and did it work? Did it cause anything to happen? So I love that you mentioned putting it in here, because of course those internal stakeholders who you ghost wrote for, or who you cleaned up their content, they need to be reminded that it wasn't just that you did the thing so they could check off the list that they published. They do want to know, how did this actually raise their profile? And so looking at some of those metrics around, does SparkToro consider them to be a rising influencer in their space, or are they being listed now for the first time in a non-pay for play industry roundup of top leaders? And I do mention the not pay for play because I think we've seen a rise in a lot of people, including folks who have paid contributor positions on some formerly very reputable business publications, who will reach out and offer to let you purchase a spot on their upcoming list for only $1,500. That happens to me almost every week. And
yeah, me too. The other thing that can help is if you've asked your C-suite to do things, showcasing how that worked. And sometimes putting a little competition amongst your C-suite. So, for example, we did a state of year-end report. We put together an entire plan of how our C-suite could share it out. There were 12 people that we asked to share it out on their social, and their shares helped drive, I think, like 12 to 20% of the traffic within the first week to the report. And then I could call out, this person and this person with a leader of that percentage. And that kind of creates some internal dialogue. They're like, oh, how did you do this? Let me help more. Yeah.
The healthy competition is good, including putting out there, like, who has the biggest following on LinkedIn? Who is actually publishing stuff that people outside of their network are interested in seeing? Because it's one thing to have a big network because you've worked at a bunch of big companies where you worked regularly with 100+ people, but it's something else entirely to have strangers following you because they want to hear what you've got to say. So I love that, the friendly co-opetition.
Yep, that always works.
So once you put all of this together, you've done all of your data collection. What are your recommendations for how to go about presenting the end of the year metrics to your internal team members?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different ways. Some people love spreadsheets, some people love docs, some people love decks. I personally like both. I like a deck that can be shared on its own, that people can forward around an email. I also like having a time to present it to the team. So it might not be the marketing all hands, but it's your own team members. Where you're like, I'm going to take 10 minutes to present this. And then also following that up with an email. On the email, make sure you put, people are going to read like the first 10% of the email. They're not going to read the rest. So
inverted pyramid time.
Exactly. Put the top 3 metrics that you want people to know. Line those metrics up to the team's KPIs, both the overall company and your marketing team KPIs. Then put the call outs for each individual team member and some kudos, who helped and why. And if you really want to get detailed into it towards the very end, I would put things that are low-hanging fruit, things that almost made the mark, and then total flops and why. We tried this, it flopped, because you just want to be honest. If you talk about all the good things in the world, you're not learning. So think about the things that you're learning from.
And if something was a big flop and it was something that was requested from another team, you don't want to be throwing them under the bus in that flop section, but having the project that you didn't necessarily think was a great idea and that you went ahead and executed anyway, and what you learned from it there means that you won't have that exact same ask from that team the next year. Or if you do, you can say, cool, it's so great, that you're looking to revisit it. Here's what we learned last time. And you already have that kind of like mini case study there. So that way you're not doomed to be, get that exact same request for like 7 emails harassing people about whatever it is, when you know that for that audience, that's not a great approach.
Yeah, it's totally true. One of the ways that I present the deck is, here are the top metrics. Here's the year-over-year changes. Here are things people cared about. And then I usually do 2 to 3 call outs of specific projects. And on those specific call outs, what worked, what didn't work, what we want to try new. So the stop, start, continue methodology.
Yeah.
And if you do that for what really worked and what didn't work, then you're not calling out a team and saying this was a bad project they asked us for.
Exactly. So this is one of those things where you keep it focused on the results and you don't focus on the people, unlike some of the other items that you noted.
Exactly.
Now, all of this sounds great when you're talking about, the marketing audience, but inevitably we have to do those year-end wrap-ups for the executive team. So what are your recommendations for, the format and what to include in doing some of that executive summary type communication? Because clearly you don't want to send the C-suite your 20-page results deck. They're not going to be happy with that.
No, you want to keep it simple. And you want to align it back to the KPIs. So hopefully you have company-wide KPIs and marketing KPIs. And you don't want to have those 20 pages of KPIs. You want to have the top 3. So putting that in there, I think for the execs, here's what we did. Here's the year-over-year metrics. Very, very, very top of the funnel. And enough that creates some interest, that they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. How did you do it? So that they come back and say, this was great. Can you tell me more? Because you always want to open up that conversation.
Yeah.
And you also never want to say anything that leads them to wonder why. So, our year-over-year metrics increased by 1%. Why? It might be 1% because you changed CMS systems. You went from AEM to WordPress. And when you change that, there might be a 20% drop in overall traffic for 6 months, but then it's going to pick up later.
Context is so important. I find that that's one of the big things when doing the kind of results reporting, whether it's quarter over quarter or annual, having to go back and remind folks, yes, where things we didn't have, the 10% increase we thought we would have this year because we completely overhauled the website. And that meant that we had pages even that had been linked to directly that, we had to put a redirect up and we didn't have a great fit for the thing for it to go to. And, keeping all that stuff in mind is so important. Or this is one that I'm seeing with a number of folks this year. When you got a ton of traffic from doing a big advertising spend, and then you're comparing that data to a quarter when you didn't have any advertising spend, especially when you're thinking about channels like Facebook, but even for, specific website traffic, you're going to have a huge drop after a big spend unless you're keeping, sustaining that budget for the advertising. So it's helpful to make the notes of that kind of as you go along. So that way, when you get the sudden but inevitable plunge, no one panics, because I guarantee they do always panic.
Or the state of the world. Like, think about the pandemic. If we look at webinar traffic and compare 2019 to 2020 to 2021 and even to 2022 website metrics or webinar metrics and even 23 webinar metrics don't come close to 2020 webinar metrics.
Yep.
They might be starting to even out back to 2019. But thinking about those year-over-year changes that happen outside of the business.
100%, especially if the kind of content that you're sharing and creating, or your audience, if they are specifically impacted by something. And, for example, we worked with a nonprofit whose content really was heavily focused around COVID response. So of course their 2020 metrics were astonishing and amazing. And, folks would then be like, well, why aren't we able to sustain it? And it's like, because people's attitudes are not being sustained. We had that initial push, and you have to build on that and give them a reason to subscribe and keep coming back. But you can't have the same content and expect that it's going to stay at those same consumption levels as things change. Totally.
The last thing I would say about the C-suite audience is really think about what they care about most. So you have your written down goals, but you might have a leader who really cares about the customer community. Or you have a leader who really cares about this one new product that you launched. So calling out those differences of saying, if they care about the customer community, we did this content, 80% of our traffic is coming from our content community that we have set up on this platform. Or if they care about the product, you could say, 80% of the traffic to the product page is coming from our content, and you can track those metrics.
Love all of that. But that brings me to, the obvious, roll up your sleeves, nitty gritty tactical question of how do you access all of the data, all the information and tools to get that data to give these kinds of meaningful data points? Because I know in some organizations, folks don't even know kind of like who has the keys or what tools are the best ones to access in order to get this meaningful data.
So the hard part is a lot of this you have to set up at the beginning of the year. Trying to set it up at the end of the year, you're chasing it down. So for like hard data, looking at your website traffic, that you can do anytime. So either if you're on Adobe or Google Analytics, really digging into the traffic and then looking at your CRM system and really digging into the demand gen, the closed won, the closed not won deals. If you don't have, especially in your CRM system, if you don't have things set up, you cannot track it back to a specific piece of content. It kind of becomes nebulous. 8,000 people downloaded this report. We had 80 sales, but you don't know if that sale happened because they came into your website based on your report. You have to backtrack it, which can take time.
And looking through, especially if you've done a lot of content, some of these deals can have 20 or 30 touch points, half of which are content. And you can't do that all manually unless you've only had a few big sales.
Yeah. And doing it to that point, doing it on one big sale is easy to do manually. But if you want to do year over year or top performing, least performing, you have to do that using a hard data system. Same thing with SEO. Looking at how your SEO is doing year over year, using something like, I personally like SEMrush, but there's others like Conductor, Hrefs that you can set up all of the things ahead of time to track. Process data is kind of a little bit more soft. That one you have to set up with your project management system. So something like Asana. One of your workflow templates, even if you have a spreadsheet, to just say, we had 80 pieces of content requested in 2023. On average, an ebook takes 3 months. It costs this amount of money. We had this many leads from it. All of that you can put together. The other thing that works is like Compost or Optimizely, the content management systems, really looking at steps and process and frankly, blockers. So going back to that C-suite person who will block the reviews, thinking through how you broke down the time and change that process around. And then I'll go back to where we were talking about earlier with the customer quotes and executive statements, having that kudos board or the folder in your email, collecting that soft data throughout the year of all that praise so you can pull those quotes at the end of the year.
And I wanted to chime in and say when I did have Compost, because we had a pretty a good sized content team internationally and lots of people involved in creating and approving content. What I liked about Kapost was it was integrated with Salesforce in a way that meant it was really easy to see which pieces of content did have at least some role in a closed won sale, so that it would actually chart it for us. So whenever we would be doing this kind of reporting, it was just a, go to the reporting page, take a screenshot, as opposed to it being a horrible process of data collection. So I can't speak to it now, but that was at least a historical use I had for it.
Yeah, and I think letting the systems do the work for you by taking those screenshots is very helpful. And also it helps the other analyst on the team to know that you're not making up numbers.
And that's important, because I'll tell you, almost every time I've had an organization hand me a spreadsheet that people were using to track data, when I've tried to go and validate the data points, it hasn't been accurate. And it's not just like, with Google Analytics, every time you pull the data, it's a snapshot in time, and due to like a bullet list of 9 different reasons, that data isn't going to be the same every time you pull it, but it's going to usually be directionally the same. But in this circumstance that I'm thinking of, literally they were just making it up because they knew no one was going to go in and look at the analytics for, the Twitter account, for example. So they were just making stuff up, and they were just making up fake increases. And, that's terrible. You can't be making up your data any more than you're making up data that you're making up fake sources for in your content, yet we all know that people have done it. So to your point, having that third-party validation of being able to include a screenshot from that source where you're pulling the data for your reporting from, I think is really important to do. Even if it's not as beautiful or it doesn't have the brand colors, I think that having that impartial validity, it does actually matter. And of course, you can still create those on-brand visuals if there's somebody who needs it in that way for their, for their PowerPoint presentation to the board or something like that. That's the only use case where I can feel like that ever seems to happen.
The other thing that helps for collecting the data is make sure you're comparing like with like numbers. So if you're doing year over year and last year's data was actually pulled, say, October 1st, the beginning of Q4 or calendar Q4, and now you're pulling data December 1st, there's a lot that happens in the month of October and November.
Yeah.
Your metrics are going to be off.
Yeah.
So either putting the context there and saying data not optimal because of when it's pulled, or saying based on, January through October 1st, and then January through October 1st.
See, and that's a great segue into talking about some of the pitfalls about, presenting this data and this reporting. Because, right now, a big pitfall that people are going to be finding when they are looking at Google Analytics is if you did not start collecting Google Analytics 4 data as soon as it became available for you to do so, you're not going to have a full year of data in Google Analytics 4 to actually compare against. And I had, one client who didn't start their data collection until Q1 of this year. So not only do they not have the year of historical data to compare to, they don't even have a full year for this year. And they're going to be bummed. But it's one of those things that a lot of companies, I think, kept hoping that there'd be an extension, or it felt like it was just too much work to do, probably because of Google Tag Manager. Honestly, that I think felt overwhelming to folks. But in reality, they could have literally just gotten, done the baseline setup, gotten that new code, put it in their header, and not done another thing, put it in the header template that's used throughout the website, and been done, and still have that data. It's like, yeah, it takes work to optimize this stuff, but having some data would have been better than where they are at now, where there's going to be a lot of gaps.
Yeah. And this goes back to, even if people don't ask for year-end reporting, why you do it. So maybe someone right now doesn't ask for 2023 year-end reporting, but next year, 2024, they start asking for it. Something changes in the algorithm. You can say, here's the metrics I pulled for last year based on that algorithm.
Yeah.
Here's the metrics for this year. Here's how they're changing. Here's the context of why that has changed.
So important.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other kind of like pitfalls that you've seen happen with reporting? Because I think we talked about data changing, technology changing, people, leaving out information so you get wise, clouding people, people like not trusting your results. What are some of the other pitfalls?
I think it's really what you're showcasing. So showcasing what they care about, not what you care about. A lot of times when you talk to marketers and you talk about content, you have to explain a lot. You have to explain, like, this is why the bounce rate really matters. This is why the time on page really matters. But they don't really care about that. They care, did someone view it and did we get a sale from it? And so showcasing that up front and doing that pyramid again, showcasing this is what they care about, this is what's most important to them, and then putting everything else in the appendix.
Yep.
And then the other part is don't make it about you or your content. It's really about the entire company and we as in content. So when you could pull in other things that are outside your team, like the events team, we wrote 80 blogs last year. 4 of those blogs were repurposed for a major event. Here's how the event subscription rate doubled. Something like that can kind of showcase how it's going beyond just its original use case.
I love that. And depending upon how your CMS is set up, you can even pull the data to find out what your best performing, who your best performing authors are outside of the team. So if thought leadership was one of the big executive priorities, within Google Analytics, you'll be able to pull that report. And if you have the author field defined, it'll show you by author for your blog content what those stats are. So then you can kind of rank them as far as, hey, here's whose content is getting read the most, or found the most in search, or here's whose content was most shared. I really liked doing that with BuzzSumo previously because it would show, hey, this is who really knows how to craft that super shareable, really highly engaged with content. And now with GA4 allowing you to see how many engagement actions were happening on a page, that's really helpful. For example, if you've got a low res version of a chart of data, you can have a link on there that's, download a higher resolution version of this, and then you can track how many people actually click on and download that, good version that they're going to reuse in their own presentations or for their own purposes. So there are a lot of things that we can do now that I think we couldn't necessarily very easily track previously, but that we can do to show how content actually had more shelf life and maybe got a little bit more engagement from our audiences.
Mm-hmm. I think the other pitfall that happens is people compare apples and oranges. Mm-hmm. So if you are comparing, say you have a very niche audience. So manufacturers in the Midwest who are producing hard hats, trying to get as specific as possible. And you're comparing that to manufacturers of shipping boxes for Amazon. There's probably a lot more Amazon shipping boxes than those hard hats. So you can't say our blog for the hard hats only got 1,000 views and the blog about boxes for Amazon got 5,000 views. So it's worse. Right. You actually have to start looking in the data. And did the hard hats actually convert to sales? Did you hit the right audience at the right time when it mattered? Or are you just blanketing, throwing spaghetti at a wall?
Exactly. What was the objective of creating that piece? And what is the total addressable audience? And if you were trying to hit the 1,000 people who were interested in purchasing large quantities of hard hats, and you had, 900 page views of it, and, a bunch of shares, and from that page you had a bunch of people click the contact sales button, well, then that's what matters versus something that's more informational and top of the funnel, where really it was just about getting that, traffic from search. Then you're going to be looking at completely different objectives and thus different metrics that matter for each of those pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, goes to why you need to, in advance, say why you're creating the pieces of content, because it's not just for awareness. The same way that every post you post on social media, you're not just hoping for a like. Hopefully, you're hoping for engagement or for people to tag somebody or to share, an experience, versus just looking at some of those vanity metrics.
Yeah. Content isn't at only one stage of the funnel. It's a full funnel activity. So if you only focused on gaining awareness and gaining leads, but your closed won deals are 11%, it doesn't really work. So looking at how can you get all of those leads to actually closed won deals. And then if you want, customer retention, how many of your customers are following your content? How many of them are resharing it, engaging with it?
Yeah.
So really thinking about that full life cycle of your customer, not just the web page itself.
And that, brings up a good point, which is, thinking about your customers and how they engage with your content. When is it relevant and what is relevant to share with your customers and the folks who regularly consume your content at the end of the year? I think we see lots of end of the year, wrap up blog posts, for example, which seems to be a pretty ubiquitous way of engaging folks. But do you have some other thoughts about how to share your annual marketing results with customers or other public audiences?
I think with the customers, it's what do they care about the most? So we had a customer community that probably anywhere from 30 to 60 a year contributed to our content. So giving them thanks for that and showcasing it. Also showcasing that so-and-so got a raise. I did one piece of content with a customer. That content did so well, it actually helped them get a raise at their company.
That's so awesome.
So calling that out in a customer wrap up of thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Congratulations to Erika. She got a promotion this year. If you haven't read her blog, it's over here. And so showcasing those wins of how they are a part of your company, not just a customer of your company, but they are the company.
Yeah.
Really helps. It's a way to showcase thank you and make sure that they contribute next year as well.
And frankly, it's a great way to get other customers saying, hey, wait, you have a customer marketing program? I can contribute to this. I could be a case study or I could be a blog. Because when they see other people sharing their stories and having that success and being supported and deepening that relationship with you when you're a brand that they love, a lot of folks, they want that too. They're like, sign me up.
Yeah. How can I get involved?
Totally. Do you have any thoughts on how we can liven up the trope of doing the best blogs of the end of the year? Because I think we have a tendency, everybody does the roundup of here are the top, most viewed blog posts of the year. And I got to tell you, I almost never click through and read those because it feels so broad and so meh. It's uninspiring to me, literally, because at the end of the year, your inbox is full of so many emails doing that. So do you have any thoughts on how to break out from the pack and actually create that kind of end of the year roundup that people would want to look at?
I think thinking around what has changed. So let me take you back to this time last year when ChatGPT came out. I think they just hit their year anniversary. And so it would be fun to see a blog from December of 2022 and then say, here, everything that's changed from this blog.
Yeah.
And then repost the blog later, but putting that in the email, remember, this was only a year ago. Here's everything that's changed and how we changed.
Yeah. Or like, can you believe it was only a year ago that we were all still using Twitter every day?
Yeah, exactly. Thinking about the people behind the top blogs. So here are our top blogs for last year written by this person. Do you know that they've also written this one? Erika's written 15 blogs for our website. Here's her latest one. And here's her author page if you want to see all the other ones. I think that's a lot of fun too. Also calling out the things that didn't work well. Here's a blog that actually didn't really perform. And this could be a fun social post. Like, here's a blog that didn't perform well last year. Why do you guys think it didn't perform well? And then do like a LinkedIn poll. And that is very dependent upon your brand, if that's part of your brand tone and voice. But having that poll come back of, the first paragraph, you lost me there, or this isn't a topic I care about. And that way,
you mentioned SharePoint, and I had an adverse allergic reaction and couldn't keep reading.
Yeah, exactly. And that would it would give you some feedback from your customers and poke some fun at yourself.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that could generate some ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are some other ways that you feel like you could really be generating ideas for your editorial calendar for next year by going through the end of the year metrics?
Well, you never want to do, I'll start with not to do, you never want to look at, here are the top performers, let's just recreate that. Let's just do it again. No, we did this last year. Let's do the same thing. But take the what do you stop, start, continue, and really look at that starting and that continuing and redoing that for next year. Or looking at the low-hanging fruit. Like, this barely worked. What is going to tip it over the edge? How can we do it differently? Also looking at things that you can optimize. I think a lot of people will try to recreate everything and do something brand new. If you have 800 blogs, I kid you not, this happened at a company. They had 800 blogs in 1 year. Why are we going to create 800 more? Why don't we look at the top 40 that really worked and then do that? Or look at the low-hanging fruit and optimize those for next year. December is a great time to start optimizing posts and not publishing new ones, because no one's going to read it in December. But if you can look at older ones and change around the search traffic algorithm, change around the pictures. For example, that graphic, if you know people are clicking on the graphic that you mentioned earlier, do you place that higher up in the blog versus lower?
And, the Content Marketing Institute does a great job with this, because it was a number of years ago that I wrote my process for defining a brand voice. And since then, they've published 2 updated versions of that post. So there's 3 versions of this post on their website. And I think that's really smart, because when you have content that is resonating with people, taking that time to optimize it or refresh it if things have changed over time, it's such the smart, easy thing to do versus trying from scratch with a new topic, a new author, new subject, going in there and writing something new. It's, that's starting from scratch versus starting from something that already has been working and reusing that URL and all that kind of good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Too many people just recreate it again instead of optimizing it.
Yeah. And that's not working smarter. That's just working harder. Yeah. And I don't think any of us need to be doing more work. Not right now, at least. I think we're all pretty maxed.
Not at all.
Well, for those of you who are listening to this live, or if you're listening to this through the archive, if you have any questions about end of the year reporting for Amy or me, feel free to leave those questions in the comments here on LinkedIn or on the page on the blog, and we will 100% answer your question either in the comments, or if you tag us on social, we'll talk to you there too. Always happy to share our experiences and those hard-won nuggets of how to get more out of this kind of reporting. Now, Amy, if folks want to hear more from you, where can they find you? How should they connect?
The best way to find me is actually on LinkedIn. If you request a connection, put something in the request email of why you're requesting. But definitely LinkedIn is where you can find me. I'm not too much on Twitter anymore. And if you want to follow along with anything fun, I'm also on Instagram. So any diving or travel or food, you can easily go there. And all my social handles are Amy W. Higgins.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Amy. And thanks to all of you who are participating in the chat. Talk to everybody soon. Bye, everyone.